Okay, so we're going to start modelling our steampunk bird, but before we do, we're just going to build a little script that creates a quad cylinder for us. There's going to be times when we want to use a cylinder and we want the circular sides to it, but we don't want the triangles on top. So we're just going to build this quick script. The first command is polycube with a small p, capital C, one word, which builds our cube for us at default settings. The next one is going to be polyselect, and one of the flags, on polyselect is edge ring, which is going to select a ring of edges for us, obviously, and you specify which edge to start at, because each edge is given a unique ID. And so if we write polyselect edge ring, the number of the edge, which is 6, and then the name of the cube that we want to select the edges on, which is pcube1. Then we can use the poly split ring command, which is going to insert an edge loop tool, which is very similar to, or it's exactly the same as the options in your split ring option box in your tool options. So we're just going to drag those down from the script editor, and then we want to use the poly select edge ring command again on a separate edge. So then we'll obviously use the insert edge loop tool again to add another edge loop at 90 degrees to the first. So if we run all of this code, there you go, we can see we've got a cube with 2 extra edge loops. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select these 4 corner edges, and we just want to scale them in on 2 axes. Obviously we don't want to scale the height, we just want to scale it in X and Z. So we can grab the ID of those edges from the script editor again. Just tidy that code up a little bit. And then we want to scale them in. Now we don't obviously just want to use the scale command. We're going to use the transform command. So we're going to put xform, scale, and we want to use 0.7 in X and Z and 0 in Y, which is in the middle. So if we do that, there you go, we can see we've got a nice cylinder made out of quads, which is going to keep our poly count down as well, which is quite nice. The trouble is, if we run that again, you can see that we get the cube first time round, but it acts on the poly cube that we created the first time round, pcube1 again, because we're specifying the name in our script. So what we're going to do is we're going to store the object in an array. We're just going to make it a string array, call it selection, and that's going to be, it's going to list the selection, put that in the array, and then we're going to substitute pcube1 for our variable, our array, throughout the rest of the code. Now for these, when we're selecting these edges, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to concatenate the array variable with obviously the edge ID. And the way we do that is by putting in brackets, put our variable, plus sign, and then quotation marks, so that it knows that that's a string, and then it'll use all of that inside the brackets as a string. So I'm just going to copy that, paste it, change the ID, same, and a 4th time. Okay, and then Maya normally leaves the object that you've created selected, so we're just going to run that as well. So we're just going to select our variable again, and then we're going to clear the variable so that it doesn't get involved if we try and add any more quad cylinders. So we run this code, and there we go, nice quad cylinder. And the test, if we move it off and run it again, and there you go, it's fine. So we're just going to delete those. We're just going to drag this up to our shelf. As you can see, I've already created a shelf with a few of the tools we'll be using. Extrude, the interactive split tool, the duplicate faces tool, which is one we're going to use quite a lot. I'm just going to change the icon for this as well to the poly cylinder. Oops, that one. There we go, poly cylinder icon, just so that we know which one it is. Okay, and now we can start modeling. So I'm going to create a quad cylinder to start with, and this is going to be the basis of the body of the bird. Just going to scale it up and out. Set an edge loop in the center, scale it up. Now, when we finish the bird, it's going to be rotated something like that, along an angle like that, but obviously when we're modeling, it's much easier to keep everything in the flat XZ plane. We're going to create a pipe, quite a few subdivisions, and just make it nice and thin. And this is going to be part of the internal skeleton. So we're going to duplicate that, scale it up in 2 axes. You can do that by pressing Control or Command and clicking on the axes that you don't want to change. So in that instance, I was using Control and the local Y axes. We're going to select 4 faces, extrude them out, scale them up, and delete the faces that they're going to be joined to on the next cylinder. Delete the faces on the first, and just vert snap the verts from the extrusion out to the second pipe. So you just do that by selecting the Move tool, holding down the V key, and then you can vert snap your vertices to wherever you want them. Okay, I'm going to select all of those and hit merge. And I've just skipped that little bit, but we've just done exactly the same thing over to the second pipe. Now we're just going to add a load of edge loops to keep those edges nice and tight, the corners nice and tight. Again, I'm going to skip through this bit because obviously it gets a little bit repetitive. But you want to go through the entire object and just keep all of those corners and all of those edges nice and tight so they don't curve too much. Otherwise, it won't look like the metal that it's supposed to be. Okay. Now that we've done that, we're going to create another quad cylinder. We're going to rotate it in the Z-axis, scale it up, and we're just going to extrude these faces in first. We want us to keep a nice hard edge, again, to create the size that we need. And you can see the number of extrusions I'm making just to keep those edges, when the object's smooth, to keep those edges nice and tight. And there we go, it's the same on both sides. And just add a couple more edge loops. So we've got a solid structure, and you can see it looks a lot more solid with those edges. Okay, now we're going to create a join between that engine object and the skeleton that we've built. So it's much the same process. We're going to extrude in and extrude up. Add a couple of edge loops to tighten up the corners. Maybe one more. Scale this down and maneuver it to the top of the engine. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move the pivot point so that we can duplicate it a lot more easily. So we're going to move the pivot point down to the center of the engine, and then we can duplicate it and rotate it, and it's positioned automatically. I've just merged those as well, so I've just gone to Mesh Combine with all of those selected as well, just to make it all one object. Okay, now we've used another quad cylinder here. I'm just going to elongate it just to act as the central pipe throughout this internal skeleton. Just extruding the edges out. Just added one edge loop and just extruded it out just to add a little bit more detail. I'm going to do the same in the middle here as well. Because obviously if this was a working thing, that the actual cylinder would be rotating. So these extrusions are the sections that would be something separate that wouldn't rotate, that the pipe would just filter through. So that's what we're kind of using them as here. So we've got another cylinder. I'm going to use this as a horizontal pipe that'll obviously go to just about where the wings are once the outside's built. Just tighten up the edges again. Okay, now we're going to build a cog, and for that we can use an actual cylinder because we're going to delete these central faces. So we're more concerned with getting more subdivisions on the outside rather than the triangles on the inside. So extruding these faces in, and obviously using Control and clicking on the Y-axis just to scale it in 2 axes rather than all 3. I'm just using the pen to polygon tool here just to rejoin some of the some of the polys I've deleted. So you click on one edge and then just click on another after you've selected the tool. And I'm just pressing G to use the same tool again and just going through. Okay, now we're going to select all those internal edges, extrude them down, select all the points and just merge them. And there you go. If you press 3, you can see it's smooth and you can see that all those points are joined. And we extrude these outer faces. We're just going to turn off keep faces together, just so that these all become separate, so that we can manipulate them individually. Extrude them a couple of times just to get them to a nice point, and then we're going to insert a couple of edge loops. And we're going to insert edge loops into these internal gaps as well to keep all the edges nice and tight. Okay, I'm just going to add a little bit more detail in here just to go through how we're making a cog. So we're going to be making quite a few cogs in this tube. So just going through how to add a little bit of detail and how to make them look a little bit more realistic. So we're just creating extra loops. We've extruded a couple in, and extruded one out. I'm just going to select these 2 faces on each of these spokes and extrude them in as well to make little indentations. We'll just catch nice specular highlights, nice touches of different reflection. So we can duplicate that, scale it down, just scale those internal verts up in 2 axes just so it fits over the pipe, and duplicate that first again. And you can see the cogs through each other, so it does add a nice little bit of detail. I'm going to add another one in the center, along the center pipe, and then we're going to add 2 on this horizontal pipe, and we're just going to rotate them in 90 degrees so that they would be affected by that cog on the main pipe, and obviously that would work the wings. And we're going to add another couple just up by the head to maintain the detail. Okay, and we're just going to make a couple of joins here as well. Very similar to the process we've already seen. We're just going to extrude it in, use world space to extrude it rather than local space. I think what you'll find is if you use local space when you're extruding a shape like that in, faces like that in, is they tend to lose their shape. So it's best to use world space if you can for that. I'm just insert another couple of edge loops, extrude those resulting faces outwards. Insert another couple of edges, and there we go. And we can just add this join. So it'll just be another thing holding the pipe up. It's useful to change some of the settings on the tools. We've got change the move tools to object space, which obviously helps if you've rotated your object and haven't frozen the transforms. And then again, just move the pivot point and duplicating and rotating it around makes things a lot quicker. And again, I'm just going to hit combine. So that's all one object, and just duplicate it and move it up. I'll just have to tweak those points. Okay. And again, just create a little extrusion. There we go. Okay, so now what we've done is we've created a plane, a 4x4 plane. I'm just going to manipulate the points just to make it take on the shape of a heart. We're just going to make a small mechanical heart here. And it does mean tweaking the points a little bit. We're going to add a few more edge loops. Again, just tweak some of the points and just smooth some of the lines out. Very, very important to keep smooth lines and a nice clean polyflow. And what we've missed there is just selected the outside edges and just extruded them out a touch, just so we've got that loop around the outside of the heart, because we'll use that later on. Just tidying up some of the polys internally so that we can get these nice squares, and then when we extrude them in, we can manipulate the corner points to get some nice circles, nice even circles. Okay, and the fourth one, and the one in the middle, which is obviously going to go over that central pipe. I'm just going to extrude these faces in once more, just to give us a nice hard edge again, and then delete those faces. So now we can extrude this object up, do it 3 times, and then we can duplicate that object a couple of times. And this is where this loop comes in handy, is we can just select all the faces in that loop and just extrude it up a couple of times. So there we go, we've got a nice metal heart, and I've selected them all and hit mesh combine again to make it all one object again. Just going to rotate it around, scale it up. Again, scale it only in 2 axes. We don't want to scale the depth too much. Okay, what we're going to do here is we're just going to make a small bolt that's going to hold all those pieces together. It's important to add small details like this if you're going for realism. I think it's easy to lose realism if there's not quite enough detail in there, if it looks a little bit too basic, because the real world is obviously very, very complex. So I'm just going to add another edge loop and just extrude that out to make a small bolt shape. Just going to scale it down and then make it a little bit longer. Just rotate it and then scale it to fit the edge there. Okay, shorter. There we go, and then we can just duplicate that and move it around. So I'm just going to skip past that just because it's a fairly obvious piece of work. Then I'm just going to duplicate one of the cogs as well, and we're going to add a couple of the cogs in these holes, you can see. But obviously it's important to have the center of the cogs hidden, because they need something to rotate around, so they can't just be floating. So I'm just trying to find some places where we can put these cogs that there will be something holding onto them in the center, but you can see them, and obviously it looks like mechanical workings. So that's what I'm doing here. That's what you can see, just tweaking it again and again. Now we're going to select some of the faces on the front side here, and we're going to be doing this a lot. Just hit duplicate faces, and this creates a second object for us out of those faces on the object, so they'll fit perfectly. We'll have to tweak some of the points when we start hardening edges like this and making it a little bit more solid. So you can see the middle's just dipped a little bit there, so we can just lift those points up. And it's so much easier than trying to model something from scratch to fit in those gaps. So you just hit duplicate faces, you've got a brand new object, and then you can just extrude that object out to add detail very, very easy. So we're just going to add a couple of edge loops just to harden the edges up. I'm just going to select a couple of the verts and just drag them down just for a nice bit of detail. And on top of those, we're going to add some more joins to the skeleton, because obviously at the moment there's nothing quite holding that heart up. So I'm just going to add a cube and just angle one of the faces by moving a couple of the verts down and then extruding that face out. There we go, just moved it along, move those verts down. That's fine. Just tightening up the corners a little bit. Okay, now we've just duplicated that object. I'm just going to scale it to -1 in the Z, so that it goes the opposite way. And then you've got the other side, and I'm going to do the same thing there. Just duplicate them, scale them to the -1 so they flip which way around they're facing. I'm going to make a few extra changes to this one, but it's still a little bit quicker than having to make it from scratch. So just going to delete that second one and duplicate the fixed one. And there we go. So that's the internal sections all modelled. Next we're going to move on to the side of the bird and build some of the details into that.